you, everybody. Thank you very much. Notice that some of this mystical music sounds like you've come to your own funeral, like Huckleberry Finn. And it's pertinent to what we're talking about because the soul is related to your death, of course, and it's the harvest of your life, and that comes forward to you in death. Sounds like I sound like a preacher, but I might actually want to talk about the science of the soul here. But the sense that you can have a life review anytime you want. You don't have to have death to have a life review. And I think you find in your meditation, some of us, that your life comes up to you sometimes in a lengthy meditation, or childhood events, present themselves to you spontaneously from the depths, and that's like a mini life review, because the notion here is that the soul wants you to know it. It has a kind of a mind of its own, so it's going to present you, particularly if you've got trauma in your life. The soul is going to kind of expunge your painful memories into your awareness so that you can deal with them. And that's healing, isn't it? And so we can think of the soul, this is sort of philosophic discussion, but more in the psychology that you can take home with you is the soul wants to become unified and whole, and when we say healed, we mean unified. Your soul doesn't want to have a part of it that's in the basement that you're never going to look at because you were abused at some point. And you don't want to look at, so that means you're not unified. You can't become enlightened if the part of yourself is hidden away. Now, it doesn't have to be a trauma. It can be something you don't necessarily, want to cop to. And we're not talking about sort of Christian sin consciousness. We're talking about, maybe you got fired from a job and you're not sure why that happened. Why did I get fired? It didn't make any sense that I got fired from. I got fired once from a place, and I found out much later that somebody just was envious of me and they got rid of me. But that's part of the soul journey. And that memory came up to me. It's actually 30 years later. I was teaching at a lousy junior college, and got fired kind of out of the blue. And I looked back and found out what happened. But the point being that it was healing for me to review that part of my life. So I invite you, in a practical sense, to cultivate a consciousness of your life story in your meditation. So it's a distinct part of meditation. You can meditate on your breath, which is a good way to get focused and centered, isn't it? Through just following your breath. But thoughts are going to occur naturally when you settle down, right? You settle down into yourself, and then these thoughts come up. And if you're in a reasonably healthy and decent state of mind, eventually the unfinished business comes up. And again, what we're saying is that the most important memories are there eternally. It's not the brain memory. So if you're dead, the brain's dead, right? So the brain memories are dead. So the cheeseburger memory is dead, but what's important lives. Well, if it lives after your death, what does that mean? It means it's immortal. It's part of you is immortal. Well, how did it get to be immortal? Did it get it to be immortal because of some brain got biochemistry? What in the brain biochemistry made your soul immortal? It's impossible. Although there's a biochemical correlate, right? Have to be some transaction in the brain that's related to this. So there may be a biochemistry or even genetic aspect or epigenetic aspect of what we're talking about. But we're talking about something that's in a metaphysical realm and is immortal or potentially immortal. So the soul making is a technique of the universe of saving what contributes to evolution of the universe. So if you created a universe, let's say you created the universe, wouldn't you want the universe to have a record of itself? You wouldn't want the universe to just like, whatever, like what's that? Snapchat, is it? Snapchat allows you to put up something and it disappears immediately. Is that Snapchat? I don't use it, but one of those programs. It lets you put up an email or an image and then it disappears. So what if that was what the universe was? Just just events without record. All right, so there really is a record. What are you going to do with the record? What do you want to do with the record of everybody's experience? What would you do with it? If you were the universe, what would you do with the record? Anybody want to?
File it away.
File it away.
Play it back.
Play it back. There we go. So I got a good audience here today. So
people to access it.
make it accessible.
Yeah.
So it's just
Put
like.
it online.
What about lying?
Put it online.
Oh, yeah, put it online on the Universal Metaphysical
You
Database.
can all access it. You have to Google.
Well, these are all excellent because what we want to touch base here, and thank you, Michael, for reminding me, is this notion that there's a collective aspect of soul evolution. So your soul is your individual soul, you're responsible for it, but there's another part of this, which is the whole universe is evolving together as one big soul. So this is known as the oversoul, right? So it's may appear to be just your life, and in a sense it truly is just your life. All cell phones off right now. So the collection of this, Carl Jung talked about this at some length, and so did who else? Aurobindo. Who else? Rudolf Steiner. I don't know about Gurdjieff. He must have. Who else? Teilhard de Chardin talked about the accumulation of the evolution of all consciousness is cumulative, collectively cumulative. So for those of you who are more idealistic, you want to contribute to the collective, right? So you get involved with politics. There's an impulse in you to contribute to the collective, even if it isn't contributing so much to your well-being. May not, but hopefully it does. We do this political work, and we don't want to sacrifice we want to be sustainable. So that's part of the mastery of this, is to be happy and sustainable and contribute to the collective. So I'm going to take questions. Any thoughts?
Yeah, how does the collective consciousness, as you're calling it, relate to the collective unconscious?
How does the collective consciousness relate to the collective unconscious? I'll repeat your questions. In Jung's notion of the collective unconscious, it's roughly the same because we're not aware of everybody else's soul evolution unless we're really advanced. In theory, you are. You can access it. But at this level, we can't easily access it, so it is unconscious. So thank God there's a receiver, collector of all these events, and then the patterns that are in that, all the patterns, what are they called? They're archetypes, right? These are Jung's archetypes. So the patterns of behavior are archetypal, according to Jung, because as you merge all these experiences, you find certain things pop up, such as the divine feminine, divine masculine, the image of the child, the divine child, the different aspects of that you get in Jungian thought, and many other archetypes, because we have similar attributes of the self. So we have similar behavioral patterns, and they merge into iconic images. So there you go. But it's mainly unconscious. So it's collective unconscious. But imagine that it's not just planetary, it's also extraplanetary. It's also interdimensional. So there's higher realms, higher beings. Their experience is also in this pool. So all experience is pooled. So why? Why do that? Why would you pool it in terms of the function of that? Why would you do that?
You want God to do that?
Why would deity do that? Or whatever does that?
That's a good question. We need to understand more about this deity.
Well, thank you. What a perfect opening, invitation. So, how many of you know process theology, what that is? Anybody ever read that stuff? World Center for that is in Claremont, University of Claremont Theological Seminary here, called Process Philosophy, Process Theology. And these guys figured out what we're talking about, that this is a collective awareness and that there's an aspect of deity that is managing evolution. So this is a new idea, because we used to think of deity as just outside of space and time, kind of up very far away from, but looking down and managing this and that. But there's another aspect of deity, according to these theologians, that is the collector of all experience, and who is contributing to it and receiving from it. So there's a give and take and a co-creation. And this is the process notion of deity that happens to also be almost identical to what is in the Urantia Book. But the Urantia Book predates that philosophy by 20, 30 years. So it's already in that text, which many of us believe is a revelatory text. But it's not that big a stretch anyway to think that there's this field effect of experience. So I even noticed, I don't know if any of you noticed today, there's a different field in the air because it's Easter. And all these fervent Christians are in prayer today. And I could feel a little bit of that. Did you feel some of that? It was like a different extra great sense of... There's an azure aura over the room. Goes with our azure hair too. There's an energy even in this small group that's collective and unified. That's called a morphic field, right? That's what Rupert Sheldrake, one of our favorites in noetic sciences, Rupert Sheldrake, said that there's a memory in nature. Everybody ignored him for 20 years until noetic sciences were one of the groups that brought him to the United States. He said that memory is stored up somehow, even for the plants and animals and even bacteria. There's a memory that goes with them. That's why they learn faster as each generation, because they're pulling down from the memory, from the collective memory. So this is again what I'm talking about here with the soul. So I had these 3 questions, and now I'm open to questions as we go. So you're welcome to do that. Interrupt me if you need. So how and why does the soul evolve? That's what we're talking about. A little bit more about the why here in part 2. In what sense is the soul part of this larger self system and then larger universe system? And third, what is the import of these 7 levels that I talked about? So this is going to get into some advanced stuff, so stop me if you want. So I call it the inner triad, okay? So here we go. So we reviewed it before. Soul, spirit, person. Mind is infrastructure. So we're not just talking about consciousness, and mind is infrastructure for superstructure. So Edgar Mitchell discovered the presence of consciousness when he was up there in space, and so this is going a little further and saying that's a container for these higher attributes, which we're not supposed to talk about because we're a materialistic, mechanistic civilization. We're not supposed to talk about this. We're supposed to let it be in weird New Age circles. So let's bring this into science. Let's bring this into philosophy. And yeah, the Urantia text is considered New Age and weird, but it's becoming mainstream now. It's in 17 languages. A lot of scientists have spoken out about it. So we're going to get to that.
It's not anywhere near New Age.
As to who wrote it. And it's not New Age, and I can prove that it's not New Age because I've been publishing books about it. And part of when you publish a book, you have to pitch it to the editors of magazines. They never cover it because it's not New Age. It's something else. Review quick. Core elements of the self system. Personhood, unique person. Spirit self. Now we're going to start using some technical terms. So the spirit self, the Atman, it's not your consciousness. It's not your mind. It's not your soul. It's a fragment of the divine. That's a premise. The evolving soul is the experiential self, and then the mind. Now, this is getting revolutionary here. So I found this old-fashioned man in the beard image in order to make a point, which is that the personality, your personality, the presence of persons, each person you see is a revelation, is a holy revelation. It's unique in the universe. Each person is precious, deserves to be loved, deserves to be taken care of. And this is the theological premise that I'm offering. Goes so far as to say that deity is personality. It's not has personality. So we're going a long step here from fundamentalist Christianity and Islam that says deity is this patriarchal deity in the sky that's there to oppress you. We're going a long way from that. We're going to purify all of that baggage. And we're going to say that personality is the presence of deity. How is it that there could be this one deity and then multiplicity of little deities? That's us. How could there be both? How could you have both?
Ocean and drops of water.
There you go.
Same as,
She said ocean and drops of water.
the same as your body with all the different cells that are controlled by
The cells in the body are like that. Yes, sir.
Simultaneous oneness and difference.
There you go. The philosopher. So in philosophic notion is the identity of difference and identity. How could you have one and many be one? How could that be? Well, that's really important. That's hard to do, but it's what Plato first talked about is that one and many are one. So the multiplicity of the one is one. And so that's a paradox, of course. So the fact that deity is love and is one, and then you find these other ones out there. So we're part of one big love network. And so this is why we say personality is a revelation of deity to the universe. So the personhood of a person, a homeless person on the street, is a revelation of deity to the universe. The homeless person is a revelation. Everybody's a revelation. Every child is a revelatory of creativity, of life, of energy. So those ideas for your consideration. So I'm going to break this down some more. Ready? There's a bunch of attributes of the personhood. We already covered two of them. Remember what they were?
Free will and self-awareness.
So there's free will attribute and self-awareness attribute. What does Gurdjieff say about that? Is there?
Well,
Is it right off the top? Yeah.
I mean, I was going to answer your question about what does Gurdjieff say about the soul.
Yeah, and both. Yeah, that too. Yeah.
He kind of says the same thing that the Hindus say, that you're born with you're born with the ability to develop a soul. Like in Hinduism, they say we start out once born, prakriti, and then as you try to evolve, you become twice born, which is Sanskrit. So Sanskrit is the language of someone who has evolved a soul in his lifetime. And for Gurdjieff, what that takes is reunifying yourself, your mind, your emotions, and your body after your education has split them all apart.
Okay.
And so
Very similar.
trying to reunify that, and that you have a higher self above you already that's very intact, but how to reach that, how to connect with it, and that takes that conscious effort, and being present in the moment to try to get through and feel that energy that's already there, intact and evolved, but we're so unevolved that we have to kind of try to rise up to that.
Thanks.
So personality sometimes is a veneer. I mean, it comes from the word mask. Persona is mask. And yet it can be a true effect or a manifestation of your essence if you can hang on to it. But it usually gets carried away.
Thank you.
So.
Hopefully you can pick this up on the mics. That's why I wanted to ask, because I knew we had stuff to say about the personhood, and we get to soul a little bit more after this. But other attributes I'm going to submit for your consideration. So when we say personality is like the mask, the persona, this is a different use of the term. This is not the mask. This is the essence, actually. So the essence. And we should have some other word for this, but we don't, actually. So imagine again that the spirit self is not what we're talking about. This is logically prior to the spirit self. So how could that be? Because spirit is the highest thing, isn't it? Isn't it the highest thing, spirit? That's what we used to say. That's what Ram Dass said. So here we're saying something is even higher and prior to it. So this is a theological leap to say there's the personality of deity is the source of spirit, rather than say that spirit is the source of spirit. There's something higher. Why do we say that? Because this is the notion that deity is personally responsible and consciously and self-consciously willed the universe into being. This leads into a practice consideration, your spiritual practice, doesn't it? Because in spiritual practice, at least in Northern California, among my noetic friends, their interest is in consciousness and deep meditation to be aware of your consciousness. And this is a little tweak on that, saying, yeah, very important, but also we want you to come to the will center of the universe, of the person, the will aspect. Will is a different thing from consciousness, as we were saying before, right? What is that? What is that about? And the reason I'm trying to highlight this is this providence of free will to you as not just for theory, but for practice. So to focus more on what is the divine will, so to speak. What is your will in relation to that? I don't know what that really is. I mean, I spent a lot of time. What do you mean by the divine will? I mean, it's like saying,
Why is deity doing this?
yeah, like there's all these questions. Why would it set it up this way so there's all this freedom? Why give us all this freedom? Well, remember, the animal kingdom doesn't necessarily have as much freedom as we do. Plants have maybe less. Bacteria maybe less. So its freedom is emergent. So why does the divine want to have this freedom emergent? Why does it want to do that? Why would you do that?
For expansion.
So it's expanding so that it can see itself reflected in us. Well, why would it want to do that?
Because it's the concept of expansion. The universe is always expanding, and I believe so is Creator.
So there's always this constant expansion, but there's also a goal here. Remember we said that the goal is to perfect, I just kind of broached this. I'm going to really get into this about we're trying to perfect this thing. Now that might sound like neurosis, right? You're going to want to be a perfectionist about it. It's not what I mean. We mean you're fine-tuning your experience and your choices eternally. You don't just have one little shot at it. And you keep refining it. Yes, please.
Thomas Aquinas says all beauty yearns to be conspicuous. So maybe the divine just wants 7 billion mirrors at any given moment as we reflect back.
Beautifully well put. I thank you so much, because my last chapter of my book, that's what I basically say, and there's a mirroring going on in what I call fractals. So the divine can fragment itself. It can also fractalize itself. And the fractal is a mirror of the divine self. So you're a fractal of the divine. You're a walking, talking piece of the divine. But remember, a fractal is the whole in the part.
Hologramic.
It's holographic.
Yeah, like hologram.
Or hologram. And so the whole is in that part, right? That's what a fractal is. Also, we're saying there's a fragment of the divine also fragmentizes. I once had this girlfriend who, we had a theological disagreement, and she said, I don't believe the deity can fragment. You know, this is what you believe. You know, I was even writing about it 20 years ago, that the divine can fragment. So that's impossible. The divine is one. How can it fragment? And my reply was, it has to, because otherwise we wouldn't be participating in it. It would be way up there, and we'd just be little, physical bodies, which is kind of like the notion in Islam, is that Allah is way up there, and we're separate. But Allah loves us, has compassion for us, sends His prophet, right? He sent His prophet. But we don't participate in the evolution of consciousness in Islam. Now, there's some advanced Islamic scholars that do, but basically in Islam, it's a divine unity, isn't it? It's a one Allah. That's it. It's beautiful, though. It's gorgeous, wonderful. Sufis really made that even more beautiful. But it doesn't have the ability to connect in this way we're talking about. And that's why in Christian thought there's a Trinity aspect. Why would we want to have a Trinitarian deity in order to, now we're filling this theology, and why would we want to have three in one? Why would we want that?
All reality has a triune nature, where you have these two opposite extremes, and then some third position that resolves these extremes.
We have a map of this that our friend Don has made. This is a complete map of what I'm talking about in the Urantia Book. But we'll get to that maybe a little bit more. So if the divine was not able to be in a personal relationship with an equally divine other, that would make a big difference. Because if it was an Allah, Islamic notion, it wouldn't have the native capacity to fragment into us as little deities. It would be a separate reality from us. So if that were the case, then the divine would be more communitarian, you might say. That there would be a family in heaven that has its own communion. You see how that's working? See how far this is from Star Wars and, may the Force be with you? Which is totally impersonal. It's totally, without personality, without love. You need to have love at all these levels. So the divine has to be a lover also. But if it's just a lover of these little ants, little humans, that's like just a parent, but it's not a friend. So this friend aspect is exemplified in the Trinity, where the other parts of the Trinity are friends. And friends share all, right? The friends share all. So you share all with your co-equal divine partners. So by virtue of doing that, it overflows into, let's have space and time. And let's park some beings like us in space and time. However, they got one big problem. What's that? They're incomplete, right? They're not deities in the sense of complete deity, because they're in time, right? They're in space and time. So let's invent space and time and give them the opportunity to evolve to become like us. So it's right there in Genesis. Remember where it says, let us make them in our image, like us. So making us like the deity, and then the Bible doesn't tell you this part, which is letting you evolve. And you know, the Bible had like an Islamic theology. It used to be just this man up there, everybody down here, you have to obey, just like you have to obey the Pope. It's the same idea. So here we have, with these new ideas, we're beginning to develop these expansive, noetic notions of personhood. I just throw this in here because it's my favorite picture of all time. I was in India. At the time, I was following Andrew Cohen. Anybody know him? He's a Buddhist teacher. I went all the way to India with these guys. And this is in India's subway. And I found a waif, a beggar, on the train platform. And the train was late. And this girl was begging for about 20 minutes. And she was a total mess and looked terrible. So I started to brush her hair. And out of it comes this beautiful face. And you can see from there, she has this gorgeous, like, movie star face. And it's just one more reminder of the preciousness of the individual, even in the homeless, waif, beggar. Anyway, just want to throw that in. If you want to see a correlation with what I'm talking about in psychology, James Hillman, of course, the great Jungian writer, thinker, therapist. Hillman's book, The Soul's Code, highly recommended. He doesn't have much of a notion of an evolving soul so much, but he has the notion of the personality coming in. And he talks about Judy Garland, for example. Judy Garland couldn't be anything but Judy Garland. Judy Garland started out from like 2 or 3 as Judy Garland. There was no stopping her, sort of like Mozart. And he talks about Mozart also. These people come in with something unique, and that's not their soul. That's their personality, essence. So let's get to the soul now, but we're not quite there. A quick review of what the indwelling spirit is. So what we're saying is that the spirit, you may think, well, this is the higher self. Cool, we have a higher self, but it has functions, and one of the functions is to monitor your life. So if you've got a movie studio, you're monitoring scenes that you're shooting. So this is like watching you, but it's internally watching you. So we've already said that this part of you that's monitoring you. Secondly, it is guiding you. So it's sort of like the director in the studio that's guiding you with a microphone, and you don't have to accept the direction, right? So it's a part of you that's guiding you, inspiring you from within, and tracking you at the same time. Third, it's submissive to you. This is the idea that spirit is not a dictator. Spirit is in you, submissive to your will, and that's where will is central, because the spirit has the will of deity inside it. So it's whispering to you the will of deity, whatever that means. And your will can be aligned or not. Third, this is a revelatory notion that the spirit is not a person. You're the person. So your spirit self is non-personal, or we call it pre-personal. That's why we need to distinguish the person from the spirit part, the person part from the spirit part. Otherwise, we would have a conflation.
Did you say pre-personal?
Pre-personal. So the spirit self is pre-personal, and the self is the person. So that you you call the shots. You call the shots. But the spirit self wants to call the shots too. But it's submissive to you, which is quite an irony because it's deity. It's a fragment of deity. But a fragment of deity is subordinate to the fractal of deity. You're the fractal. And the two are kind of they're trying to get into cahoots. So this fragment has this major thing we call soul making. So finally getting to that. So the soul making is the immortalizing. It immortalizes the significant moments in your life. So this is, just throw this in a little poetically. Why does it do this? Why does deity want to do that? Because it's not able to do it directly. Deity is not able to be you, literally you. But what Christian organization said that deity is literally you? Anybody know? Comes out in some of...
That was agape, the religious science.
No, actually, I'm thinking of Baptist Christians. The original teaching in the 17th century by, what's his name, was deterministic, that everything that is happening is predetermined.
Predetermined.
Yeah, because deity is actually in you doing it, so you're not really choosing it. You're not really choosing it. It's predestination. Anybody remember the name of the great theologian? Started that whole wing of Christianity.
Presbyterianism.
Yeah.
I know who you mean, but I can't think of the name either.
They've dropped this thing, and they don't talk about it anymore, but the original idea is that there isn't really free will, it's predestined, because God is doing it in you, There's really no self. So it was an interesting idea, but it's more like that God is a little bit separate, wants to experience your experience through monitoring you and guiding you, yes.
Do you talk about Hegel at all as far as like this God spirit and time evolving through?
Very much, yeah. Yeah, but the Hegel thing is pretty far out, but very difficult. But Hegel really got this straight, actually, I think, all of it, everything we're talking about. But
I saw that the Hindus actually studied Hegel when the British were in India, and they got inspired by him to kind of revive their own religion and those same ideas and concepts.
yeah, especially Aurobindo, without a doubt, was pulled in Hegelian theory and evolutionary theory into Hinduism. So, and Hegel, all these things I'm talking about are in there, except really the notion of personality as unique. It's not so much in Hegel, not so much in anybody, really, other than maybe Teilhard de Chardin and maybe Gurdjieff, maybe Steiner. I'm not sure. Needs more research. Well, funny you bring up Vedanta, Hinduism. They have these notions. Now, we haven't talked about Buddhism. I want to just say a quick thing, and we're getting to the end here. That in Buddhist thought, guess what happens in Buddhism? They remove person, don't they? They remove soul. No soul. It's called the anatta doctrine. There's no soul here. There's no evolving soul in Buddhism. Sorry. And there isn't a person there, really, in Buddhist thought. How do you know that? Because their concept of the afterlife. It's a mess.
Siddhartha did not have that as the origin. That got changed.
Buddhism's evolved now. Buddhism now sounds like Christianity, these days. But we're talking about classical Buddhism. Classical Buddhism said there really is no soul, meaning there's no evolution. It was very embarrassing for them when it got to the 19th century and they proved there's evolution. So Buddhism's had to update for evolution. I'm going to skip this. Let's see here. There's so many things. I'm going to skip to John Keats. Maybe you studied some John Keats in college. John Keats lived to age 25, and John Keats intuited everything I'm talking about. John Keats intuited everything I'm talking about. Keats said, "How then are souls to be made? How but in the medium of a world like this?" Meaning, you have to have the problems of life experience to evolve a soul. So I'm going to quote from him a little bit more. Sorry, it's hard to read, but he basically said Christianity got it wrong. Christianity said this notion of deity does everything and you have to get mercy and salvation, right? Versus Deity places you in these situations so that you grow a soul. And he also posited that there was a spirit self. It says it right here, but you can't read it from there. He said there are sparks of God in you, and then there's this soul that grows through experience. So that's the same idea. And it turns out that the Urantia Book quotes John Keats right here. And it says that how Jesus regarded the world not as a veil of suffering and tears, but as a veil of soul making. So just a review, and we can wrap up. Unique self, this divine fragment within, and the human soul as all distinct parts of us that come together and unify through the agency of the self. So once again, I ask you to consider that it's not your consciousness that's doing this. It's something above you that's doing this, as Kathleen was saying. That is also what Gurdjieff noted. It's like a higher dimensional part of you that unifies all of this and allows it, enables it, and hosting it around your unique self, so that you can make a contribution that's unique and creative, which then is memorialized and immortalized as your soul, that you can then move into the afterlife. So there's a third part of this. I don't know if I probably shouldn't, it's like 4 o'clock, so maybe we should wrap up, but let's take some questions and comments that you may have. Yes?
Could you expound on what you were going to?
We also didn't get to Gurdjieff on the soul, so if you want to contribute that. Do you want me to?
I'd like to.
Well, a couple of quick slides then.
Okay.
Those are quick.
Well, that was some stuff on where the Urantia Book comes from, you may wonder.
Yes.
You want to do that real quick? Should I do some of that?
Who wrote it?
Okay, who wrote it?
William Kellogg.
So, in this particular building in Chicago, these people were contacted and were told through a channel that a new book was going to come. And this one guy wrote a whole book trying to prove that the channel was Edgar Cayce. The Edgar Cayce channeled the Urantia Book. But it's something like that. It was a guy like Cayce that they spoke through and announced this text to these people, particularly these people. And this guy here was this famous psychiatrist in the 20s, 30s.
Father of modern psychology, they call it.
They say he's the father of modern psychiatry, not psychology. He studied with Freud, knew Jung, came to the United States, was teaching at University of Chicago, and he had this clinic, his medical clinic. And that's where they contacted him through a medium in 1911 or so, stating that they were going to teach them. So they taught them privately for about 10 years through the medium. And then in 1923, they announced that they would give them this text. And it began to arrive. And this group here were the early readers of it. Got some better shots. And this is, back in the 30s. And so when these papers, chapters, they were not channeled. People think it's channeled, but it's not channeled. The way we have proof that it was not channeled is that there was the courts, there was a copyright lawsuit, and the courts ordered, give us your evidence that you own this. Because if you channel it, you can have copyright. The channel can have copyright. And they could never prove that there was a channel, nor could they prove that there was an author. There's no author, there's no channel. So it's believed by some that it just materialized.
Do you want me to tell you what I found?
Maybe afterwards. So whatever it happened, these papers would appear, these people would read it, Then they would feed questions through the channel, and then a new version would appear. So there's an interaction with these humans. There's about 400 readers. So they evolved it, and this was kind of the central group, known as the Sadler, William Sadler's family, his wife, who was a physician also. He was a physician and psychiatrist. She was a pediatrician. That's their kids. Some people think this guy's the channel. His name is Kellogg. He's from the Kellogg family, Kellogg Cornflakes family. But he's not, in my view. That is the channel. It's not the source of the text, but this channel on the side that was coaching them. So it was finally published in 1955, and it has 4 parts. Yeah, I guess we should do this. So I've been speaking mainly from the middle part of the book. The first part is the cosmology I gave you, and the last part is very important here on Easter, is it's purportedly the life of Christ, the angelic record, the angelic record of the life of Christ. And I'm giving lectures on it. If you go to my YouTube, I have lectures on Easter called Esoteric Easter. So if you just plug that into YouTube, you'll see my lectures, which are going over the chapters about Easter, Holy Week, Easter, and I have more going up there on aftermath of Easter and Pentecost, and that's out of the Urantia Book. In any case, that's part 4. And if you do nothing else, try to read part 4. It's like a novel. And some quick facts about the Urantia Book. There's 2,097 pages, and it's in 17 translations, and some key tenets. And this is one of the beings that we think brought it forth. This is this very high angelic being known as an Ancients of Day. Yes, sir.
Back in the 70s, when I had a physical bookstore, somebody came in my store one day and said, "What is this symbol?" And I gave him my best explanation. It's what survives death, it's what's done with God. But it's such a good question that it stayed with me the rest of the day. And that night, I went home, and I got upstairs, I was meditating, and I was meditating, and I lifted up out of my body, which I was halfway out of my body, and realized I could keep going. But because I didn't know for sure my abilities would come back, I got myself out of the feet. And then afterwards, I thought, I've been asking all day, what is the soul? And my soul is shaping. What is the soul? Now, that is more what I always thought was the spirit in the soul. And I've never asked anyone before, is that the soul? Is it the spirit? What would be the difference? How would I know?
You know, I've given a lot of sort of concepts. Now, the application is not easy. But if you have these definitions that you can accept up front, then we can do analysis. But if you don't, it's hard, because it's just a jumble. Because we got 1,000 books on this, and they all say kind of different things. But my view is that the sense of self that you had when that was going on is not the soul. It's the personhood.
It was out of my body. It was not my body.
It's not in the body.
I'm not my body. It's proof.
Well, yeah, that's body and soul, body and non-body. So the non-body part of you has aspects. So I've been trying to, state what these aspects are. So it's not just one kind of thing. It's got parts. So the part that's floating is functionally all of you, but it has different parts that do different things. So one part of you is eternal. The spirit self is eternal. That's not you. That's been gifted to you to work with. So that's not you. And so it's not floating up there. It's kind of all pervading in a way, but it's part of you at the same time. So the soul is the part that you created with the spirit. But I'm distinguishing that from the self-aware part. The self-aware part is yet another part, and that's the witness of it. The witness of it. Now, if you get advanced, then the witness fuses with the soul. The person and the soul fuse. That's enlightenment. So that's why we want to distinguish this so that we don't have deluded people running around thinking they're enlightened. So we have a lot of that. And it's inevitable because they don't have these basic structural understanding. So if you're a psychotherapist, it's helpful to make these distinctions. So that's some reply, but you have to be humble in the face of this. Yes, Kathleen.
I hate to open up a big other can of worms, but I'm always wondering how this all fits into dark energy and dark matter. I mean, are we still just talking about that 5% of the universe that we can see, even planets, other planets? I mean, how does dark matter or dark energy, is any tradition in history ever addressed that, in their own way, their own concept of it, if they had any concept of it? And what is it? I mean, how do we fit into that? How much is that affecting our life and determining our life?
Wow.
I expect you to know.
In a minute or two.
That's right.
The Urantia Book talks about dark.
It does talk about dark matter. That's a fun subject. Maybe we should open this up a little bit if you want to.
Well, basically, the dark matter is really what hides the light from us. You can't really see paradise. You can't look at a telescope and find this center of the universe.
The center, we call paradise.
Because it's actually blocked by this dark matter that surrounds it. It actually makes up most of the gravity that we see in the universe. In fact, we know that there's missing gravity in the universe, or else it'd be flying apart. And what's holding it together is this dark matter that keeps us from being able to see this center of the universe that he was showing earlier.
We are discovering in sort of this little subset of Urantia people that look at this, that really the Urantia Book is the first place that black holes were described. And I can show any of you who are interested, some scholarly work on this. So that is really the secret to understanding dark matter. And who? Sorry? This is way past Einstein. This is.
But the time period in which you're doing black holes was pre-1940.
Yeah, really the physics of black holes is 60s and 70s. There was
In the 90s.
Yeah, I mean,
But it's in this theory of relativity.
it may be implied in theory of relativity. So, so the debunkers of the Urantia Book state that it's a literary hoax and that these people anticipated what the greatest scientists and biologists, and they wrote and they put in this book as a hoax. So it would be without a doubt the greatest hoax of all time. And I'm pretty good on hoaxes because I have the manuscript of a book that proves that Alice in Wonderland is a literary hoax. I think Alice in Wonderland was not written by Lewis Carroll. We have proof. It's actually written by Queen Victoria. And the guy that spent his whole life on this recently died, and he gave me his manuscript to publish. And it's already been endorsed by all these big professors that it's kind of proof that it's a very big literary hoax. So this is a much bigger literary hoax. If they figured out Einstein, they figured out evolution of consciousness, they figured out genetics, and put it in this book, didn't put their name on it, didn't make any money off of it, lost maybe 2 or 3 million publishing it. For what? You know, I don't know. Anyway, but I'll add one thing about dark matter, is that the human genome has a dark matter. They discovered that, or they thought that most of the genes do nothing. They couldn't find anything out about them until recently. And they called it dark junk DNA. And then they found out that this is the DNA, or this is how DNA works, that it has to do with your soul making. I mean, they don't say it that way, but the experiential part of you changes the DNA, doesn't it? It's called epigenetics. So the epigenetic modification it was considered like dark matter in our biology. But it maps into this, that our experience is changing our genes. That's how profound it is. So in answer to your question, because somebody asked, a couple more things. This is a Cartesian grid. So imagine your soul is on this grid. So if you're a really idealistic person, you're doing well on the y-axis. So you're going up. But if you're a really practical person, you're doing well on the x-axis. So maybe you're the mayor of some city and you're keeping things running, but you're not particularly spiritual, right? You're not considered spiritual if you're a business person. But let me tell you, business people make things work. And so they're doing really well on the x-axis, which is quantitative. But the idealists and the creative people are good over here. So this teaching says you want both. And you want both balanced. You cannot come to enlightenment if you're a lopsided personality. So that's why I have the Cartesian grid. So think of yourself moving up, but also moving out. Out meaning you get a lot of skills. You learn languages. You learn how to fix things. You learn how to edit a book. You know, these are skills that are on this axis. But this is the axis of soul making, having to do with quality of thought and feeling. And so we want the mayor of the city to also have a high quality consciousness, don't we? So then you've got a pretty enlightened, advanced politics. If you've got a president of the United States whose consciousness, quality of consciousness is pretty low, but the truth of Trump is that Trump is very broad. Has a broad grasp of things, but he doesn't have this. So we want to have somebody who's got both. A couple more on this point. Let's see here. This is Ken Wilber and me.
Is this in your book?
Yeah, all of this is in my book. There's one more thing. So, anybody know the 4 quadrants of Ken Wilber's theory? No? Oh, too bad. So, in his theory, you're going through levels of consciousness, right? That's what we all think, don't we? But he says that you can break out levels of consciousness into lines of God. This is really cool stuff. It's really important. It's in my book. That you may, here's the moral line, this is the cognitive line, this is the emotional line, here's interpersonal. You may be good with your relationships, but you're not, but you haven't read a book in 10 years, so your cognitive line is low, but your relational line is high. Your spiritual line, maybe your spiritual line is really high and you're practically a fanatic. Well, we want you to balance that out and get better cognitive, better emotional. You know, people become fanatics because they're not in touch with their feelings very well. they're overriding their feelings with their idealism. So he theorizes that we need to master all of the lines of consciousness. It's a great topic for noetic research, is that consciousness breaks out into skills and attributes that all have their own arrow. And so it's similar to what I'm saying, that all of you has to grow equally. But he actually has 12 lines. 12, and or even more. This is from developmental psychology. And here's a really nice map that he has where this is actually his own, what they call psychograph. So this guy, Ken Wilber, is way high on his cognitive line, and he's below average in his emotional development and his interpersonal development. This is a very poor psychograph. He's an out of balance person. So a person's out of balance like this cannot really progress. Remember I said there's circle making? That's the self, the whole self growing as a whole self. So that maps into my own book, and you can't read this, but the Urantia Book says that in the future life, there are 3 attributes of the self that they work on. The feeling self, the thinking self, and the willing self. The doing, thinking, and feeling. And all 3, so you can go into the afterlife and you're a mess. And they say, look, we're going to map this out. You need to go to a special school on how to feel more deeply. Because you were a construction engineer your whole life, you never really felt anything. You know, you didn't really pay attention to your wife, and we'll give you a life review here. Here's your life. Here's your wife being disappointed, hundreds of times. You didn't even know it. Here's your kids, feeling neglected. So we're going to work on that. Or you might go into the afterlife and they'll say, you mastered your feelings, you mastered you're a thinker, but you didn't really do anything. You just did your job and went home. So we're going to teach you how to have the will to do the right thing. So they have a special school for that. So they just have 3 lines. So the Urantia text has 3 lines: willing, thinking, and feeling that you're developing. So these are the latter part of my book. And if you go online, you'll see YouTube talks I've given on all these subjects. On my site, it's evolvingsouls.com or Evolving Souls Community YouTube channel. It's a YouTube channel, Evolving Souls Community, where I cover all this stuff. And one last slide. So this is sort of my psychograph, where I'm more cognitive, you can probably tell. And my willing self and my feeling self are underdeveloped compared to my cognitive self. So my level of a consciousness attainment cannot be higher than my lowest level, right? So if you're primitive in your feeling life, it wrecks everything else. So you got to get your feeling life. So you may think, oh, I'm a great intellectual, but you're wrecking your relationships. So you're only as good as your lowest development. So in my remedial work, I have to work here. And I spent most of my life just sitting there reading, more or less like a professor type. And now I'm trying to get into action. I'm in my 60s, I'm trying to get into action. So I'm trying to develop this. So I want to bring all of these up. And so this is, see the line going across? So I'm as high as my lowest line in my levels. And so I hope that you can get your lines to all go up together to the highest level. So we'll leave it at that today, and I think it's after 4 o'clock, isn't it? And you had a few comments? Okay. Thank you, everybody.
I want to thank you so much for sharing your book with us. That was a very generous offering to us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Karen.